because we are about to have a discussion kind of just about the team overall. So I'm going to break this kind of down into segments. And obviously we've been talking about this all year long, so you already know all this, but still, just to set the stage. So we have those first, let's see, probably until mid-January. When did we make the De'Aaron Fox trade?
I think
Early
at the
February?
beginning of February, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So you basically have through January. That is the team pre De'Aaron Fox. And what I will say about that, we can start there, Ethan. I think despite bringing in De'Aaron Fox and obviously all of that brings that we'll get into, the beginning of this season with just the additions of Harrison Barnes and Chris Paul, we saw significant improvements. Like we beat our win record from the past 2 years in January. You know what I mean? Like, but before the All-Star break, before De'Aaron Fox. So what are your thoughts on that point of the season and kind of the progression we saw from the team that was essentially the same that we've been kind of seeing the past 2 years, if that makes sense?
Yeah, intangible wise, I think it was a incredible improvement from last year and previous years in terms of what Harrison and Chris Paul as veterans brought to the team with consistent shooting and a change of mindset to actually compete and win games. I think that's clear. Just watching the games, you could see that. Statistically, I think we definitely improved offensively in terms of flow, assist to turnover ratio, and actually running sets and half court sets. We talked about that at length with Chris Paul's addition. And I think you saw the impact as well with guys like Trey Jones prior to his trade. Um, However, we were still fringe to get into the play in,
Right.
right? So there were still some clear gaps in our competitive edge, especially in the West. However, still improvements, just like not where we exactly wanted to be. I think we both thought we would be 100% in the play in 9 or 10 seed. We were probably more so 11 or
Right.
12, and we ended up finishing at 13.
I think that is what you just hit on at the end there is the nail on the head. It's that we were very close. We were better than we were the past 2 seasons, but we probably were just outside of the plan instead
Yep.
of having a chance to be in, which is where you and I thought kind of we were. Now, obviously, when you add in De'Aaron Fox, that changes the conversation
Dramatically.
on a multitude of levels. But I feel like, again, I just wanted to harp on the beginning of the season because as much as there were still mistakes and there were still things, like you said, to the point, we were just outside of the play-in with that roster. Um, I think the incremental progression that we did see is significant, as
Hmm.
much as it may not seem that much because of the way that the season ended record-wise. But I think
Hmm.
even if if the season went on without a De'Aaron Fox trade, right? And we just keep the same roster that we had at the beginning of the season, I think we actually end up having a record similar to the one that we have right now.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously, because some of those wins, we wouldn't have that we got with De'Aaron in the few games that we did get with him and Wemby.
Right.
But I do think there still would have been, like I said, just some sort of increase in the number of wins, like around 10 wins or so. Nothing crazy, not getting in the playoffs, but still this youth core, improving in a sense as much as Harrison and Chris Paul are, a huge aspect of that. Now, with all that out of the way, Ethan, what are your thoughts on just kind of how you look at the roster post De'Aaron Fox trade, as well as just post Wemby injury? Like, what are your thoughts on that second half of the season? I know I'm
Hmm.
kind of not being super clear in what I'm asking. Like,
No,
I'm
you're
bringing
fine.
up bringing up like a lot of different points here. But what are your thoughts on that second half of the season and just kind of what you saw there with all of the context surrounding it?
On paper, it's perfect, right? Like you think about De'Aaron Fox, what he brings to the team as a facilitator, as a scorer, as a defender, and as a guy that pushes the pace of play. I think it fits perfectly next to Wemby and Devin and Keldon. And you think, okay, this is 100% a playoff, or this year, let's say a 100% a play in team. Like we thought for certain that he would bring us to the ninth or 10th seed. Um, that did not happen for a multitude of reasons, including Victor's injury. However, I think there were still some things that didn't perfectly work, right? Like we talked about the fit with De'Aaron and CP. Obviously, we think that's going to be different looking at next year with or without Chris Paul. We think they won't be playing next to each other, so that will remedy that. But there were also setbacks with Devin's fit next to De'Aaron
Mm-hmm.
that we never quite saw correct itself until De'Aaron sat, and then Devin played a
Mm-hmm.
little bit better, right? There and We never really saw a lineup with De'Aaron and KJ playing off of each other, so we don't know how that quite fits next to one another. So there's still some things that are unknown. And as Spurs fans, maybe we're a little more optimistic when we should be more based in reality. But I'm optimistic that those things will correct themselves looking at next season. Um, but we still have to be honest about what this, even with the small sample size, it wasn't a perfect like fit, seamless fit immediately. There were flashes. I think especially with De'Aaron and Wemby, I think their chemistry was really good right off the bat. Um, but with the small sample size, that I mean, obviously that's not a certainty. Um, but I'd like to think, Jude, that looking into next season with De'Aaron Fox and everybody else that's under contract, we are without a doubt a playing team, and I think the playoffs are within the world of possibility.
Again, I think what you hit on there at the end, there's a lot that goes into it because
Mhm.
you've got De'Aaron's injury later in the season with him
Right.
getting shut down, and obviously the games after that. But then you've got the few games that we did get with De'Aaron and Victor and the entire team. But that was also so early that they never really got time to mesh. So there's like,
There's so many layers.
how much can you take away from that? The one thing I will say, like you said, I think Wemby and De'Aaron's pick and roll chemistry, that was kind of innate. Maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it popped off the screen pretty quickly,
Yes.
is when they got on the floor together. But then again, like I said, you've got the little stretch of games with De'Aaron and the team, so it's like maybe you could take a little bit there. But then again, we talked about how his intensity wasn't really, at 100%.
Plus his
So it's
injury.
right. So it's obviously hard to evaluate the end of the season. But I think what happened when that De'Aaron Fox trade happened, and even the injuries and everything, it flipped the switch on how we're looking at the team.
Yes.
And obviously, that's an obvious thing to say when you bring in an all-star point guard in the middle of a rebuild. But still, the way, as much as we acknowledge the progression that we saw in the beginning of the season, I'm evaluating the same players in a different way after that trade happens, after the Wemby gets shut down for the season, after even De'Aaron gets shut down for the season. Um, so I think I was probably being a little bit more, me personally, was being a little bit more critical. That's how I felt as a
Mhm.
Spurs fan kind of after that trade. Now, again, I try to not go crazy. And, me and you, we try to, give credit. You know what I mean? When somebody has a good game, even if they've had a string of bad games, we'll celebrate the good game when it happens. Um, but man, I really think that's really my takeaway of the end of the season. As much as, we talked about all of the other things that we, saw in the post games, like, this group of players still wasn't able to really put it together consistently. It felt like, if Devin was going to have a good game, then Keldon was going to be off. And if Keldon was going to have a good game, then Devin was going to be off. Um,
Mhm.
we did see some shades of consistency with a lot of those guys. But again, really, when it comes to the end of the season, it was all just about individual evaluations because the rotations were just so non-representative of what the future was going to look like.
1,000%. And we didn't even talk about Jeremy Sohan, who was also
Right.
in and out of the lineup, and then you have the shooting struggles, ups and downs of Julian Champagny. So I think your point is well taken.
Yeah, the mindset shifted and
Mhm.
like the mentality changed. As much as the evaluations, you couldn't take away as much. The
Mhm.
way that you were looking at it was different. So that's the best way that I can describe the end of the season.